How's it going, YouTube? Heldenhorn here, and today I want to talk about one of the biggest influences on my love of music and what inspires me musically. So, if you know anything about me and music, there are three influences that you have to know. The first, David Bowie, or anything related to David Bowie. Second, anything with an awesome bass line. I'm a bass player, it's what I do. Third thing, if I played it in Rock Band or Guitar Hero and liked it, it's probably music I liked. So today we're going to focus on that first one. And I wanted to talk about it through using a tier list. So today we are going to put all of David Bowie's studio albums into a tier list that I made. Um, and that's not including any of his live albums. That's not including most of his B-sides. It's not including his compilations that include some B-sides or live album stuff. It's just the studio albums where he is credited as the main artist. Um, but before we dive into that, I want to tell you just a little bit more about myself there. So when I was a wee lad, about the age of 9, my dad would drive me to the sports card shop to get me Magic the Gathering cards or Yu-Gi-Oh cards or whatever I was into at the time. And on the way there and back, he would always introduce us to some music. One day it was just me and him driving to the sports card shop, and we were driving back, and he said, "Hey, son, little baby Heldenhorn, I want you to check this out. This is David Bowie." And he puts in the Best of Bowie album, which starts with Space Oddity. And I knew right then, I was like, oh, this is really good. And then it got into more tracks like Changes and Ziggy Stardust, and I'm like, I want to keep listening to this. Dad, can you burn me a CD, which was a thing that you would do back then? Back in, oh gosh, 2002. Um, and so I listened to a ton of David Bowie. And here I am, 19 years later, and it's still the biggest impact on what I listen to musically. So, let's take a look at all of his studio albums. I'll tell you some about them and why I'm ranking them, and we'll go from there. So here we go. All right, so we have this broken down into 5 tiers. The first being the Desert Island Classic. So, would I put this album, or would I take this album with me on a desert island to be the only thing I listen to for 40 years? Would I be okay with that music still after 40 years? Next is Can't Go Wrong. These are the albums that I would recommend to people if they asked me about David Bowie music and they'd already listened to the Desert Island Classics. And I'd say, okay, yeah, go here next. Then there's Decent Effort. Now, when you've been a musician like David Bowie, who has put out 50 years of music, because he recorded from about 1967 to 2017. He did a little bit before 67, but it was always like singles. So he has 50 years of music under him. Not everything's going to be a hit. So these are just, there are 2 or 3 or 4 tracks on there that are decent, but it's really nothing special. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. Then we've got Just Not Memorable. Honestly, with all this music, and there's a ton, some of it I just don't remember or I just never got into. There are a couple of those. I think 3 or 4 albums might fall into this tier. And lastly, if David Bowie were to rise from the grave, I would go up to him and I'd be like, David, I love all this music you made. But why did you make this particular album or 2 or 3? Why did you do that? These are trash. You should feel bad. These are just bad. There might be like or two songs on there that are okay, maybe. So those are our five tiers. So let's dive in. Um, I'm going to go chronologically because weirdly, I remember his music in chronological order because I've been obsessed with this for 19 years. So we're going to start with David Bowie, the self titled album here. Um, and it's very 60s. It feels very much like he had some poems and he just kind of sang them with a 12-string guitar or whatever instruments he had handy. Um, there, there are a couple things that are very stereotypical 60s in here where they're testing out things like brass instruments with rock or using vibraphones or string sections. If you listen to Rubber Band off of this, like you've got basically a brass quintet just layering instruments in and out, and it's bizarre. And it ends with a tuba solo. For you tubists out there, this song is for you. But honestly, um, it's not a memorable album to me. I like Rubber Band. I like Uncle Arthur on it, but when I was listening to it recently, I just spaced out. And our second album, which also is called David Bowie in the United States, but in the United Kingdom, it was called Space Oddity because in the United States he hadn't made it big yet. Um, but he had a big hit that really struck, and that was Space Oddity. So with this album, this has a lot of songs I just really, really like. From Space Oddity, of course. I remember like all the songs, like Unwashed and Somewhat Slightly Dazed. Signet Committee is one of the one of the most underrated David Bowie songs ever. It's an epic. It's a 9-minute epic of good. I highly suggest Signet Committee. Janine has a good chorus to it. Occasional Dream has a good chorus. Wild Eye Boy from Free Cloud. It's memorable. Memory of a Free Festival is also pretty epic. So this one I'm going to go with Can't Go Wrong. You've got Space Oddity there. This one I really love. It's not quite Desert Island, but it's real stinking good. Next, we have The Man Who Sold the World. Um, this one, most people in the United States don't really know about. They know the song The Man Who Sold the World because it was covered by Nirvana on their MTV Unplugged. But this album is really, really solid. It's also the first album featuring his on and off longtime co-writer Mick Ronson, who played guitar on some of his most memorable tracks. But this one has The Width of a Circle, which again is one of those songs that's just super underrated because it's 8 or 9 minutes long. Um, then you've got All the Madmen. That one's really good. I'm looking at the list of all the songs, and I can remember all of it. Um, the one thing I'll say about this one is there are a couple that are really off, and if you look into this one, there's a lot of really like occult stuff going on, a lot of stuff related to Aleister Crowley. Uh, so if you want to look into that, there's a really good podcast on it by Last Podcast on the Left that covers some of the songs from this album, including the Supermen and um, Savior Machine. This album's a little occult, but you wouldn't know that if you didn't know Aleister Crowley. But again, looking at this album, there's a lot of really good stuff. It doesn't quite get into Desert Island Classic, but it's really stinking good. Next, we are going to Hunky Dory. This is when Bowie started going glam. Um, a lot of people recognize him for when he got all glittered up and all that through doing 70s glam rock, and he helped catapult that as a genre. And this is where he really started that. This album, top to bottom, is just so good. It starts off with Changes, Oh You Pretty Things. Life on Mars is just epic. Kooks is fun. Quicksand has a great chorus. The only weak song I'm seeing on here is Fill Your Heart, which was a cover anyways. Um, and then the really underrated one on this one, I think, is the Bewley Brothers. I highly recommend it. Now, this one is also fairly occult. If you look at um, Quicksand, especially, that one straight up is just like Aleister Crowley. I am following you to the pits. We are gonna be homies. Um, but this to me is a desert island classic. I could listen to this one forever. Speaking of desert island classics, and I'm just gonna throw right up there, Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. It it is just so good. Um, it starts off with the perfect intro to an album with 5 years. Then Moon Age Daydream was my most listened to song for like a decade. Um, Starman is memorable. Again, the only weak song on here was one that was a cover, and that was It Ain't Easy. Um, Lady Stardust, the chorus is just, it gets to your heart. Ziggy Stardust is good. Rock and Roll Suicide is the perfect ending to an album. It's just so good. And this is the only album where I really bring in the B-sides or um, the tracks that were released at the same time. Um, but you've got John, I'm Only Dancing, and Velvet Goldmine. Velvet Goldmine ended up being the name for a stinking movie about glam rock. There's just so much influence from Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust. It is perfect. Other than It Ain't Easy, you can listen to this forever. This is where you start with David Bowie, hands down. Like I have to put in the top left corner, and I know this is stereotypical of anybody who's listened to Bowie, but it is true. It is just the perfect album. Now, and I think a lot of these two, looking at Hunky Dory and Z Stardust, has to do with Mick Ronson being involved. These are the two albums that Mick Ronson was involved in the most. And you hear that guitar sound and you just know, oh, that's Mick. Or you hear those string arrangements and those were written by Mick. He influenced the sound of Bowie so hard at this time. The next big influencer on Bowie was Mike Garson, who helped be involved in Aladdin Sane. And again, I'm just going to throw this up in Desert Island Classic. So notice these three right in a row chronologically. Desert Island Classics, they're so good. But right from the very beginning of this album, it punches you in the face with with Watch That Man. But then it takes a big shift. And this is where Mike Garson plays a big role in David Bowie's sound for a long time. Aladdin Sane, you get this piano intro, bum, bum, ba-dum, and these flourishes going up and down, and just all the piano work that Mike Garson did for this really sells this album. You've got him doing a lot of stuff on Aladdin Sane, Prettiest Star, uh, Lady Grinning Soul. That is like the perfect Bowie song for piano. Um, and then you've got the rock songs where Mick's involved, or um, yeah, Mick is involved in those. It's hard because there's Mike and there's Mick. Mike Garson, Mick Ronson, and they're both together on this album. This is the one really big one where they were together. And there's some interplay between them on Aladdin Sane especially, but it's just so good. And then on this one, I think the most underrated is Cracked Actor. Like that one, just oh, it's a sleazy, just good song. I can't recommend it enough. Aladdin Sane is so good. Just you gotta listen to it. And then after we've gone through these three desert island classics, because Bowie's being pressured to put out stuff constantly now, and because it's what he does, we get pinups. And pinups is a complete cover album. It's Bowie just doing covers. And there are a couple decent ones with See Emily Play, Sorrow, Growing Up is really good, and Port of Amsterdam. But Growing Up and Port of Amsterdam were um, B-sides at the time. So they weren't even part of the album. So really, it's just. Honestly, I want to throw this in decent effort, but it's not memorable. it's not worth buying really. I only have it because I'm a collector of all of his stuff. Next, though, we shift back to Bowie at the height of being Bowie with Diamond Dogs. Diamond Dogs had a lot of controversy around it when it first came out because it has this anthropomorphic, super sexualized David Bowie, and um, on the original cover, they had the anatomically correct lower half of the dog on the backside, and so then they got an airbrushed version of that to sell in stores. And if you got the CD version like I did, they put a sticker right over it where the dog's jewels are. But the album itself is based heavily on George Orwell's 1984. Um, However, Bowie couldn't secure the rights to make a movie about 1984 or to release music about 1984. So instead, he just took this dystopian idea and made this Diamond Dog world. And he had this big theatrical show to go with it that ended up being an absolute disaster financially. But as far as the album goes, it's very strong. There are a couple of little things in here that are well, really only one or two things to me that are but it starts off with Future Legend, which like gets you just creeped out from the get go. Then it punches you with Diamond Dogs, which then goes a little disco at the end, which is kind of funny. Then you've got Sweet Thing, Candidate, Sweet Thing, Reprise, which are just these three songs that just make this collaborative big effort of just awesome. Um, then, to me, the second weakest track of this is actually the big single that everybody knows from it, Rebel Rebel. I think that song is absolute trash. It was written really just to be just a hit that he could throw on the radio that people like. Um, it's the I love rock and roll of David Bowie. Like, he doesn't like playing it. Nobody, like, it's not a good song, but it's so easy to latch on to. And then Rock and Roll with Me is a great ballad. We Are the Dead just creeps you out. 1984 is super disco. Big Brother's good. The only other weak one here is Chant of the Ever Circling Skeletal Family, but that's just a weird outro thing. Mick is out of the mix, so that kind of loses some points. But between Diamond Dogs, The Sweet Thing Sweet, and Rock and Roll with Me, I think. Do I put this in Can't Go Wrong or Desert Island Classic? Like, I think I gotta go with Can't Go Wrong, just because um, Rebel Rebel and Chant. But it's good. It is dang good. It's very close to being Desert Island Classic. But we'll put in Can't Go Wrong. Next, we have Young Americans, and this is where everything shifts for Bowie. He goes all R&B and totally shifts from the whole glam thing, and this is where he starts changing his identity even more. And that was a theme for Bowie if you know anything about him. Young Americans is a great song. Win is all right. Fascination is pretty all right. I don't remember uh like right. The cover of Across the Universe is hit or miss. A lot of people like it, a lot of people hate it. Um can't remember two of these other songs, and Fame is really good. I think just because of Young Americans and Fame and just his vocal prowess that he shows on this album, I'll put it in Can't Go Wrong. Um, but it's bordering decent effort here. Next, Station to Station. Um, this is where he starts going experimental again because you're starting to get more synthesizer into the music scene at that time. Um, and he gets experimental also in just doing really long songs on this. Like he's got 5 tracks on a 40-minute album. But Station to Station, that's an epic song. It's long, but it's epic. Golden Years, a lot of people really like. I mean, I can sing along with that one. That one's okay. I don't hate it. Word on a Wing is a decent ballad. TVC 1.5. That song is amazing. It's fun. Stay has a great chorus. And really, I think my favorite song on here is his cover of Wild is the Wind, which is a cover from, I think, the 50s, which was used on a movie at one point. But this album, like, I'm just looking at this track list and it's so good. I Desert Island Classic. I think, like, the if I'm ordering these, I'd put it actually in this order. We'll actually order these. We'll put that. Eh. Okay, we'll move that there. Okay, we'll leave that. Anyways, moving on. So now we're getting into his Berlin trilogy, where he got super experimental because he's like, "Hey, Brian Eno, let's hang out in Berlin together." And Brian Eno, who was doing experimental art rock after having left Roxy Music, was like, "Oh, okay, I can do that." Um, and I think that was before Brian Eno started working with Talking Heads. I think that's a few years down the road. But Brian Eno got involved in Talking Heads too. Um, and so they started off with Low. A lot of people think this is the perfect Bowie album, just because it's so experimental. And a lot of those people that think this is like the perfect album probably just like the art of the album and are listening to it really high. And okay, sure. And this is one I don't like to think of track by track. It's got Breaking Glass and Sound and Vision, which are really good. Um, but if anything, I just think of it as the lighter, less accessible version of the next part of the Berlin trilogy. Um, so I personally think it's decent effort. I know a ton of people would put that Desert Island Classic, maybe can't go wrong. But it's okay. Um, yeah. I'm glad he got experimental, but yeah. But Heroes. Heroes, I think, of the Berlin trilogy is where he aced it. And not just because Heroes is like one of those songs that everybody loves. Um, but overall, this album compared to Low, and you just have to compare the two. It's darker, the choruses are more accessible. It's got some more grit to it, and I think he found that fine balance between instrumentals versus songs where he's singing. So on this one, it starts off with Beauty and the Beast, which is just a crunchy grinder of a song. Same with Joe the Lion. Sons of Silent Age is a nice ballad. I think the instrumental stuff on here is a little more accessible too. And then ending with The Secret Life of Arabia was interesting. Um, like it's one of those songs I used to hate, but the more I listen to it, I'm like, oh, there's a lot of depth to this. This song is awesome. But Heroes, I mean, even if just for the fact that it has the song Heroes on there, you can't go wrong with it. But the other opening songs are great. I think I would probably put this one above Space Oddity, but not above Diamond Dogs. We'll move you there. Okay. Next, we have the last part of the Berlin trilogy, which is nothing like the others. Don't quote me on this, but I think no, Brian Eno was still in the mix, but not nearly as much. He kind of went. He's flaky when he starts working with people. We'll just leave it there. Or at least in the 70s and 80s, he was. Um, this is one of those songs that has a lot of hit and miss songs. Um, African Night Flight's pretty good. Move On. The composition on is cool. Same with The Assassin. DJ's the one anybody could listen to, really. It's the most palatable. Look Back in Anger was weird. It feels like that song was way ahead of its time now that I'm thinking about it. It feels very 90s, but it was written in 79, but with a weird John Lennon kind of sound to it. Um, and then Red Money's good. Boys Keep Swinging is good. Um, I think I can't recommend this one to people. I think that's what's going to define this one between decent effort and can't go wrong. But there are some sneaky tracks where if you get behind the composition of them, it's awesome. I remember watching a documentary about them and I was like, "Oh, this album is better than I thought." I used to think it was a just not memorable album, but it's up there now. So we'll put that Um, we'll put that just below low. Now, we get into scary monsters, um, and the 80s are starting with Bowie. And he's he completely shifts away from the Berlin trilogy. He tries to get into more funk, into more just heavy rock stuff with this. Um, it it's more sprawling and epic, I think, than anything in the Berlin trilogy. So we've got It's No Game, which is a great opener to an album. Um, Up the Hill Backwards is eh. Scary Monsters is great. Ashes to Ashes, super awesome. Fashion, awesome. Teenage Wildlife, he shows off his singing a lot. Scream Like a Baby was eh. Kingdom Come was Because You're Young, eh. It's No Game is really, really good. Like it starts off with It's No Game and then It's No Game 2. Um, I mean, really, I could recommend this one to people. It's pretty solid. Like, I wouldn't feel bad handing this to someone. I could see where they wouldn't like it as much, but it's a good representation of Bowie being experimental while still being accessible. So let's see if I can find the album. There it is. We'll put that in Can't Go Wrong, put it just below Young Americans. Now, um, we'll go on to Let's Dance. This one people love. This is Bowie acing how the 80s works. And this is probably the only album where Bowie aces how the 80s works. This is the last album on this list until we get to 1993, where I feel really good about talking about this album. Um, so, luckily for you, the next couple albums I'll be able to just skim right through. Um, Another thing about this album, people don't realize this, but Stevie Ray Vaughan is on this. Like, when you listen to the guitar solo on Let's Dance, or really, I think on Cat People as well, that's Stevie Ray Vaughan. Holy cow. And then he also had, because he was working with Iggy Pop on and off throughout the past 4 or 6 years before writing this album, Iggy Pop wrote the lyrics to China Girl, which is a song that hasn't aged well, by the way, but that was a hit at the time. But Modern Love is super good. Let's Dance is super good. Ricochet's really good. Cat People, holy cow, I love that song. Um, that was actually written for the remake of the horror movie Cat People. Um, and then there's another version that was used in Inglorious Bastards, which is what sold me on this song. This was also, weirdly enough, weird random fact about Let's Dance. This was the only cassette I ever owned. I had a friend who, when I was like 13, was like, "Hey, I have this David Bowie cassette. You're the David Bowie guy. I thought of you. Here, take Let's Dance." And that's the only cassette I've ever owned in my life. I think I ended up getting rid of it a couple years ago, just not thinking about it, and it ended up in the trash. So I need to actually like purchase that album at some point. But this is one of those songs or one of those albums where you really cannot go wrong. Um, I'd put it above all of these, not Diamond Dogs level quite yet. It's not a Desert Island Classic. I know a lot of people, the average person, the average listener would put it Desert Island Classic, but I wouldn't. It's just not my taste as far as essential David Bowie goes. Now, as I mentioned, the next couple, it took me a while to ever listen to them, and uh, we'll talk about it. So we've got Tonight, um, which has two really, really good songs. It has Loving the Alien. I can listen to that song forever. The song Tonight, which has Tina Turner on it, by the way, pretty solid. A lot of people like the Blue Jean on here, and it's a grindy blues song. It's okay. But when you only have, we'll say, two songs out of nine that are good, um, And how I was talking about just not memorable earlier, that's the definition right there. It's just not memorable. I'll put it above these two just because I remember two of the songs. Honestly, on Pinups and David Bowie, I don't remember much. Um, Never Let Me Down, which is the next one, very much the same thing. Um, Day In, Day Out was okay. Time Will Crawl, really good. I can't remember the rest of the album to save my life. So we'll put that one here. Um, Next, we're getting into 90s Bowie. Um, well, I guess late 80s Bowie, 90s Bowie. We have Tin Machine and Tin Machine 2, which Bowie was trying to make a rock band at the time. And I tried listening to these in the past, and I couldn't get through it. It was just not good. It's a bad attempt at making a rock and roll band. So we'll put Tin Machine and Tin Machine 2 there. It just, why? I see he was trying to get rid of his ego, but it's just bad. He never performed any of that music when he was doing his David Bowie tour stuff. It's just not good. Don't bother with it. Just don't. Next, we have Black Tie, White Noise. I don't like it. I really don't. It's really bad. It sounds like 90s fashion show music. I've tried really hard to like this album because I know a good amount of people do, but I just don't. It's just bad. Don't do it. If you like it, I don't know if we can be friends. Um, then we've got The Buddha of Suburbia, which is apparently a soundtrack that he wrote for a couple of, well, he wrote the soundtrack for a mini series. And because I'd never seen the miniseries in my life, I've never listened to Buddha of Suburbia. That's the only one I've never even attempted to listen to. Maybe I'll give it a try sometime. I don't know. But I can't say, David, you shouldn't have, because I haven't listened to it. So it'll be the epitome of not memorable because I've never listened to it. Okay, now we get back to stuff I kind of know about. Outside. This is probably my favorite of his 90s albums. Not probably, it straight up is. It's a good album. Um, Bowie was trying to do this thing where he wanted to make a trilogy of albums detailing this murder mystery crime story in this dystopian world. And so in this album, there are a bunch of these segs where you've got these weird characters talking to you with background music. And that makes it hard to recommend to people, but it's one of my favorites. At least as far as anything after Let's Dance came out. Um, it also has, I believe it has Mick and Mike on it. So Mick Garson and Mike, Mick Ronson and Mike Garson. I knew I'd mess that up again. Um, but it's got really strong tracks on it. He never finished the rest of the trilogy of his murder mystery, but Heart's Filthy Lesson, that's got a wild music video. Um, Hello Space Voice, great. The Motel is great. I'm Deranged is alright. And then Strangers When We Meet is really good too. It's hard to rate this album though, because it's got all the weird segues in it. Um, but I like it, so I can't give it decent ever. It has to go and can't go wrong. But where do I put it in here? I don't like it as much as Man Who Sold the World or Space Oddity. I think I have to put it there. I like it better than these two. Next, Earthling. It's hot trash. It is straight up hot trash. You can go right there. I even like Black Tie White Noise better than Earthling. Actually, no. I'll put that there just because of uh, he did a um, he did I'm Afraid of Americans on this album. And that was a pretty good song, specifically the version he did with Trent Reznor. But the rest is hot trash. He was trying to do bass and drum stuff. Didn't work. It was gross. Um, Tried doing electronic stuff. It's bad. Don't buy it. I'm glad I only spent $5 on it. Still, that might be too much. I'd rather get a coffee. Um, but then he kind of fixed things with his next album, Hours. Um, it's very, it's a very palatable album. Nothing super memorable though, to be honest. Um, except to me, like I can't recommend this to people. It's gonna go in decent effort. I'll put it here. I would recommend Thursday's Child, Something in the Air 7. The Pretty Things Are Going to Hell is a great song. Um, but otherwise, like, it's it's all right. It's not bad. Um, it's just not a big deal. Then we've got Heathen. And I thought when I was getting things ready for this list, I thought this album would be in the decent effort category. And then I went through every single track. And I remember the chorus to every single song on this, which means it left some sort of impact. Cactus is amazing. Slip Away is great. This one has a ton of Mike Garson again, I think. Um, I Would Be Your Slave is great. I Took a Trip on a Gemini Spaceship is pretty alright. Heathens is a great song. The only thing I don't remember on this is A Better Future, but yeah, it's good. It's really stinking good. I think just because everything's so memorable, I have to put it above Heroes. I just have to. Um, Next, we've got Reality. And this came out when I was super getting into Bowie, when I was 10 years old. Weird to think I've been listening to Bowie for almost 2 decades. Um, it's easily his best record to hand to somebody who wants to get into Bowie, that wants something that's not the 70s or the 80s. Um, just everything's really solid on it. New Killer Star's great. Pablo Picasso's underrated. Um, Loneliest Guy is a great ballad. Um, Fall Dog Bombs the Moon is pretty good. Reality's great. And then freaking Bring Me the Disco King is probably one of the best compositions Bowie ever wrote. It's super driven by Mike Garson. His vocals on it are incredible. It's just so good. Bring Me the Disco King is incredible. Um, and then, of course, like, just as he puts this album out and he puts the reality tour out on DVD, which I watched religiously, um, of course, then he disappears for 10 years from the music scene. But let's find a place for reality. I gotta say, it's a can't go wrong. Um, I'm gonna put it just above Heathens. Let's Dance is a hard border to beat just because that's an easy one to hand people. So next we have, after his 10-year hiatus from making albums, we have The Next Day. And this one caught me by surprise when it came out. I freaked out. My girlfriend at the time could not handle me because I'm like, oh, Bowie made a thing! He hasn't made a thing since I was 10! And then he puts out The Next Day. And the way he hyped up the album was really good too. Just subtly releasing singles one at a time. Um, I remember The Stars Are Out came out. Oh, wait, no, it was Where Are We Now came out first, I think. That song's great. Stars Are Out is great. Next Day is alright. Valentine's Day is alright. One of them has Tilda Swinton in the music video. I think it was Valentine's Day. But as I kept listening to this album, and I loved it, I put it down for a while. And I looked at it, and I'm like, nothing's really great on this. Like, we've got the two songs that are great, but overall it's not memorable. So we'll put it on the top of the not memorable. Because it is better than Tonight. Um, but it's not great. If you notice, he got very clever with the album art and just put his cover from Lodger there, or not Lodger, from Heroes there, and just put the next day, saying it's the next day in Bowie's uh, progression of music. And then we get to the Black Star. We're at the end, folks. This is the last album he did. And holy cow, he went out strong. Um, I remember at the time, like, he put out Black Star as a single, and I had trouble wrapping around it for the first couple minutes. And then it gets to the middle section, and I am sold. I was sneakily watching the music video at work when it came out, in between calls at work. And that song is incredible. Um, and then later he put out Lazarus, also incredible. And then he put the album out on his birthday, which I used to celebrate every single year by listening to all of his albums. And I was going to do it that year, but I just didn't get around to it because I was so focused on Black Star, um, which I think is fine. And then 2 days after the album comes out, I get a text message from my best friend at like 6 a.m. And he's like, "Did you hear?" And I'm like, hear what? About David Bowie. And he didn't respond, and I quickly just typed up David Bowie in Google. And I was just shocked when I found out he passed. Like, I cried a lot that day. Eventually I got halfway through the day and I put in Black Star to try and cope with it because my hero had just died. Like, I'd been listening to this man for 16 years. Um, no, I guess 14 years. And he just suddenly passed away. He didn't really tell anyone other than anyone super close to him. And all of a sudden he's gone, and you listen to Black Star, and you're like, he was trying to tell us he was going to die the whole time. But he wanted to be tongue in cheek about it because he's David motherfucking Bowie. Um, so that just added a whole new level to this album. And I would probably give this as a can't go wrong, but I think the way he handled putting it out, it's a Desert Island classic. It's beneath these four. These four are the best. But just between Black Star, Lazarus, and I Can't Give Everything Away, like, it's incredible. So, folks, we did it. We ranked every David Bowie album. We didn't just put them in tiers, we ranked them. Um, so, thanks for sitting through my journey of talking about David Bowie. Um, Feel free to subscribe to me here on YouTube. Throw a like my way, whatever you want to do. You can also follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/heldenhorn. Play a bunch of games there. I'm going to do some more tier lists on there. But thanks for tuning in. It's been great having you. Bye.